everyone, and good afternoon. Today is a new session with Code with Sally after the break. The sessions run every Thursday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Unless I'm off, I will let you know in advance on LinkedIn. Today will be a lightweight session. Today we'll finish the discussion we started about the SObjects, Salesforce objects, and we'll be focusing mainly on the best practices. And if there is any questions about homework, or we'll pick some of the homework we gave before to solve together in the session. And I will be available as well to answer any questions related to the SObjects or any topics we discussed earlier in previous sessions, or any questions you have for development too. If you missed the sessions before and you want to view the recording, you can go to the YouTube channel, Code with Sally. Make sure to subscribe and keep an eye whenever I add a new video so you can watch it if you couldn't make it to the session. Today, we'll be starting with the SObjects, and before the best practices for them. Just before starting, anyone has a questions about any of the topics we discussed before for SObjects, the generic SObjects, or how to do a create, update, delete, or the database methods. Any questions there? I'm checking the chat to see if anyone has a question. Okay. It seems no questions available now, or no one has a question, so we can proceed with the topic for today. So as discussed today, we will be summarizing or going on best practices that when you work with SObjects, you have to take care of. So the first one is avoiding doing any query so-called statement inside the loop. So let me show you like a bad example, and then we see and discuss how we can do it as a best practice. So let me open here the developer console, and I will run the execute anonymous, and I will paste the code that is not a good idea. And let's go through it so we understand what we are doing and also discuss why it's bad. So what we are doing here, I'm getting the list of active accounts, and then we are doing a for loop through the accounts. And then within the account for loop, I do get the contacts for each account and then print it. So if I run it now, it's working, and it returns like how many for this account, how many account contacts we have. For this account, we have 2 contacts, and so on. This is a big no, and you should keep an eye that no one does it. And if anyone does it in the code and you are doing code review, you should catch it and you should ask the developer to change it. So this is a first no. Don't do a query, a so-called statement inside a for loop. Any suggestions how we can solve this and do it in a good practice? So let me put this for you as a bad. This is bad practice. Put it that, don't do it. And I put it here in the chat too. So, okay. So now what we want to do is, instead of doing the query inside the for loop, why we are doing this, because we want the account ID. So whoever wrote this code wrote it that way because they are looping through the account one by one and getting the context related to this account. So instead of doing that, like this is a bad practice, what we want to do, we want to, after getting the list of accounts, we'll use something we learned about before, which is a set. So we'll create a set of type ID, and I will name it, say, set account IDs, and I will initialize it. If you remember, we agreed before we have to initialize it as an empty set so we can use it. And now what I would do, instead of for looping through the accounts and getting the contacts, instead of doing that, I can put in the set of accounts here, I can add the account IDs. So that will go through account by account that we got, and we'll keep the IDs in the set. So here, the for loop doesn't have any query. Okay, but at this point, I didn't get yet what are the contacts for this account. So what we will do is that we'll use dynamic query, and we'll learn more about it as well when we talk about the SOQL, but we are taking bits and pieces of SOQL now. What we will do is that I will return a list of contacts, same, and I have here the select ID, name, account ID from contact, so it's almost the same. In the where, I do in that means I'm giving the query a set. Instead of giving only one account ID, I'm giving the query the set of IDs. So I have, for example, 510 accounts. I will have 510 IDs here, and then it will query all at once, and that will create for me the list of all the contacts. So now I got all the contacts outside the for loop. I didn't do the bad practice to have the query inside the for loop, but we are missing a piece. I want still to print for each account how many contacts we have. So to do that, we'll use another collection that we learned about. We'll use a map. So let me do here. I have a map, account to contacts. So I will have a map, and we agreed before, the map, you will have a key and you have a value. The value can be anything and the key the same. So here I decided that the map key will be the ID and the value will be the list of contacts. So that's what we created here, a map where the key will be the account ID and the value will be the list of contacts. And then I will loop through the contacts. Let me get the code so it's easier and faster. I will loop through the contacts that we got. I have here the list of contacts. I got them. I loop through them. And then I check that if I don't have the ID of the account in the loop, in the map, I create the value. I initialize the value of the list to be an empty list. And that's because, again, we learned about the list together, that we cannot use it to add because we use an add method. And when we use an add method, if it's a null list, it will give me a null reference and it will cause an issue. So here we just preparing the list of contacts to be an empty list in case we don't have the account yet. So what we are doing, if we don't have it, we initialize the value to be an empty and we put it in the map, the account ID as the key and the empty list as the value. Then what we are doing here, that we are adding, we are getting the list of this account and we are adding the contacts. So we are adding, we have the key as the account ID and we have the contact. So for the first account, we'll have a list of one contact. For the second account, we'll have a list of two contacts and so on. So here I'm just preparing the map. I'm splitting them. So we got all the contacts at once using the set here, and then I'm splitting them by the account ID. And I'm splitting them by the account ID by having a map where the key is the account ID and the value is the list of contacts. So that's the benefit of collections where you would need them. We need them a lot in such cases where you have a set of IDs, use it to get all the records at once, and maybe you split them in a map. And then I will print it to give me the same output here. I will do here print for this account, how many contacts here, best practice. I add it here and I will have, I'm printing for each account. And then I'm using the map to get the list of contacts, because you remember when we spoke about the maps, when you do the get, you're using the key, it will return for you the value. So the get account.id would return the list of contacts for this account. And then we are checking the size. This one of the method we learned about when we were talking about the lists, and that will tell me the size. So if I run it now, account ID, sorry, I didn't, this one, line 16. I think I changed the variable name. Yeah, change here this one to be the set. So now if I see the debug, you'll find that it's the same. Like I will have for the same, for example, if I take this ID, here I'm printing we have 2. If I go and look for it, it's 2. The same account that had 4, it showed 4. So it's showing the same output, but this is the best practice to avoid having any so-called statement inside a for loop. Someone will feel like it's a bit too much or it's a lot of code, but this is the best practice to use to not have any so-called statement inside a for loop. So even though it feels a lot, but that's what we need to do, because having a so-called statement inside a for loop, you may hit a limit from the governor limits of Salesforce, because you may, especially like you feel the benefit of that in, for example, triggers. You may have a lot of records and you are inserting more than 200, and having a loop like for each one, number of DML statements will increase and you will hit a limit very soon. So that's the benefit of sets, lists, and maps, how you can avoid having in such scenario, having a for loop inside a so-called statement inside a for loop. Any questions so far? I'm checking the chat to see. Okay. And welcome, Larry and Anu. Like you joined after we started, but feel free anytime if you have questions. This session is a bit lightweight, so we are just going through the best practices. So we will have time to answer any questions you have. Any questions before we move to the next best practice? Okay.
Can
Yeah.
you wait, hold on, please. Can you explain from line 20 to line 22 again for me?
Line 20. This one?
Yes, to line 20. Yes, yes.
Okay.
Right.
This one, the reason why we are doing that, because the first time your map will be empty. So you don't have anything, right? Then you're starting to get the first account. So the first account you have is this one. If I start creating, like doing, to put for like, let me do that, account to contacts, dot put, and let's say I put here the ID for it, and then I need to add to the list the contact. So your list, I cannot do dot get directly, like without those lines, I can't do it directly because the map doesn't have this account. So if I try to get the list of contacts for this account, this will return null. So if I try to run it, for example, see, it would tell me here that at line 25, which is this line, there is a null pointer, because when I try to get the list of this account, I couldn't find a value and I didn't find this key because it's the first time to add it to the map. So this one will return null. If you try to add to the null the contact, because the list is null and it's not there, it will give you the null reference. So this one here, what it does, it checks like, do I have this key? So it will go and see, like, do you have in your map like this key the first time? So this key, do I have it? The answer would be no. So contains key will return false. In that case, when it returns false, the negative false is true. So that means the expression altogether will be true because it does not contain the key. So in that case, I will perform the logic I have in the if statement. And all what we are doing here, I'm saying put in the map, I want you to put the key as the account ID and create a list empty. So define the list as an empty. And we do that, again, if I didn't do that, let's say I was putting here null I didn't do the initialization. Let's try it. Here will give me again the null reference. Let's try it. It will give me here line 25 that I have a null reference. And in that case, the reason is different. I have the key. So this one found the key, but the value is null because the list is empty and it's null. So it will return null. So again, it will give you the null reference because you're trying to add contact to the null list. And that's why we got the null reference. So that's why the first time ever we put the key in the map, I'm just initializing the list as an empty list. So when I go here, I will say get the list for this account ID. What will happen? I will return an empty list. And then I will say to this empty list, add the contact so I can add it. Okay. Let's assume I had for this account another contact. The next time I'm looping on the second contact, what will happen? When I will check here, do I have this key in the map already? The answer will be yes, because I already have it in the map. So all this code in the if statement will be ignored. And then it will go get the list with the value of this key, which for example will have now the contact one, and then it will add to it another contact. So it will have contact one and contact two now. So the benefit of those lines is just to initialize the empty list of contacts the first time we enter the key in the map. Is it clear, Olo?
Yes, thank you. It's very clear now.
You're welcome. Any questions, Larry, Anu? We're good? Okay. I don't see questions in the chat too, so I think we can move to the next one. So that's the first one. We want to avoid doing any so-called statement inside a loop. The second one is we want to bulkify any DML statements. So what do I mean by that? Like we explained before, I can have, like, for example, account one equal new account, and I have name equal test 1, 2, 3. And then I can have account 2, 3, 4. And let me here change the name 2, 3, 4. And I can have here 4, 3, 3, and so on. Like those are random accounts. What we can do is that we can say insert account 1 and then insert account 2 and the same for 3 and 4. That's not like it's not a good practice because that means I have here 4 DML statements. It will count against the limit I have. So I have here 4 of them because I created an insert statement for each of them. And it may seem like, okay, what's the problem with that? They are just 4. Again, when we work with code in like insertion or any code we are working with in general, we have to think about the big picture that, okay, now I'm working with one account, but what if I have a method? For example, I can have a method and I give it a number of accounts to create and it loops. Like, for example, I have onboarding, for example, 100 students. So let's say I have a function that will take the number and it will go for a for loop and create 100 students. I can insert one by one, and that would be too much. So anytime you are doing a DML statement and you are creating records, multiple of them, and especially if they are the same type, we saw how we can even do it for different types altogether, but it's always good to bulkify. Bulkify means instead of creating one by one, we'll create a list. So I will do here accounts, and I will initialize it as an empty list. And then I add the 4 accounts in this list. So I can do here dot add, and I will add account 1, and then take this copy. I do 2, 3, 4. And then I can insert. In that case, instead inserting one by one, we'll insert the whole list together. So that's the second best practice we want to keep in mind. If you see it in while you're doing code review, or if you find yourself doing it, think about bulkification. You want to make it bulkified and you want to insert all of the records together. In that case, this would be considered as one DML statements versus one statement instead 4 statements. And that's what we want to do. And we feel it more as well when we work with large data or big amount of records, or you want to create 20 accounts and 100 contacts and 10 products in one transaction, for example. So you will find yourself in the need of the bulkification, especially if your logic or work is working in bulk. For example, in my case, I was working for a client where we needed to have, we are creating codes and we have code line items. So they create the products or the items they want in the line items. So, and they had huge amount of lines, like even they were using CSV files to load the data. So we can have thousands of records for the line items. If I take line item by line item and insert it, I will hit a limit for sure. Like, because they upload huge amount of records with the CSV and I take it one by one, I convert one row to a code line item and insert it, that will cause an issue. What I need to do is take one by one, do it as a code line item as we are doing here with the account, but instead of inserting one by one as we do here, I add it to a list and then insert the whole list together. And that will apply the same for if you need to do an update, because sometimes, for example, you may need to get all the accounts that were created yesterday and by mistake someone assigned the wrong owner ID. And I want to change all the owner IDs to be a specific user, for example. So I will get all of them, update the list of accounts that return their owner IDs, and then update the list altogether. I don't update it one by one. And let's say if I have the list, for example, here has 4 accounts. If I got a SOCO statement and it returned 10, but I need to update only a subset from them, you can create another list and update the ones that you are interested in if you have a condition or if statement, and add the ones in a new list of accounts that you want to update and update all of them together. So that's something very important to keep an eye on. Don't do single DML statements multiple times, just bulkify. Any questions here? Okay, let me take it for you. Bad. Good. So I will put it here in the chat. Any questions? Okay. So let's put it in Slack too. Okay. So the next one, that's something we discussed when we were talking about the SObjects in the DML statements. But it's good to keep reminding everyone with it, because until today, when I do sometimes code review for people, I feel that sometimes they don't take care of that. The error handling is very important because, for example, you can, for example, create here account object equal new account, and I want put a name for the account, and I can do insert account object. This one will give me an exception, right? And that's something we want to avoid, to give user unhandled exceptions, or exceptions that will return ugly message to them that DML exception, insert failed, and this details, and the message sometimes even gets more complicated. Maybe this one will look simple. It says required field missing, and we are missing the name. But in general, we want always to think, and it's not just about SObjects, always, we want to think about the exception handling, and we want to have our code inside a try and catch. Here, last time as well, we were talking, we discussed different types of exceptions, and we saw even how we can create our custom error handling exception. And we discussed like the error exceptions has different types. One of them is the DML, and that will happen when a DML statement will fail. But for example, if I have addition that, sorry, division and I divide by 0 or null pointer, this won't be triggered, the DML exception, because their type would be different. So we always have to be mindful of the type of the exception we are using. And it's a good practice as well, like to have at the end the generic exception that if it's not failing or it's not caught in the DML and numeric exception or anything, it goes to here, the generic. So you make sure you do it. And let's see, for example, here, what will happen. If I try the same, sorry, here it says line 7 variable does not exist. Line 7. Ah, okay, because I named the exception here EX. So let's run it now. Now I didn't get the pop-up ugly message, the unhandled error, and I got here instead error insert failed and give me the error that we can get. And in general, in real like scenarios, what we want to do is sometimes we want, instead of showing the get message, what we do is that we have a logging object where we log this message, the stack trace, the details of the message there. But usually, instead of showing the get message here, we say error record failed to be inserted. Contact admins, for example. Sometimes we want to hide for security reasons. Sometimes some clients have this. They don't want to show the exact error message and they give like a error message in English, what happened or what's the exception or something failed, and ask the user to contact the admin, and the admin can have the exact log in the logging if we logged it in a record, like the logging can happen here in the record. And the second best practice is having the generic exception. Even like if you have DML, you have your custom catch for your custom error message. But for example, let's say here integer z equals 0. And I have here decimal division equal 3 by z. So this will give me an exception, but the type of the exception is not DML. It's not a DML exception. I cannot divide by 0. So what will happen when we run it and we'll see it? This friendly user message won't show. It will show the generic error message. So if I do here and show the debug, it tells me generic error, divide by 0. So it's another good practice, not just rely on, like if in your mind you have DML exception or you have your custom exception, don't just rely on those. You never know, maybe an extreme scenario, edge case you didn't test for your code. Always have like at the end your generic catch exception for the generic error. So in case it didn't catch in any of the specific ones before it, it just got caught here. So that's something else. But in general, it's a good practice to have your try and catch, because we don't want the unhandled exception and the error popping to the user. We want to handle the errors, and we want as well, if we have the logging functionality in place, we want to log it so admins can look into it and take care of the error or fix the code and work on it. So that's the next. The syntax of the try and catch, you'll find that there is a question, if I'm understanding right, that we want to have an if statement here. But the try and catch, So exception handling example. You will find here in like the syntax of it, you always have the catch, and then between the brackets, you specify the type of the exception. So here, try, and here, generic exception. Here, they were trying DML exception. And you can have catch, and then finally, if you want, finally, we didn't talk about it, but finally happens after catching the error. For example, you want to close a connection to do something here because they were writing a file, so they want to close it. But we will talk about the finally when we talk more in details about the exception, but that's the syntax of the catch. Like you cannot have an if statement here. It has it's a keyword in Apex, try and catch, and finally. What you can do is that you can add different blocks. And if you don't need different blocks and you want to merge all together, simply you can remove the specific. So you can have only the generic catch. The generic catch will catch any type of exception. But usually, the reason why we do different, because sometimes you have your custom error, because sometimes you want to throw a custom error, and we saw this in action when we were talking about that in class, and you want to through a specific text and you want to take it as is, or in the DML, you want to notify a certain team or lock it in a different way, or show an error masking the message and not showing which required fields are missing, for example. So sometimes you want to do the specific if you have different ways of handling them. But let's say in all the exceptions, I would be logging the error and showing the message as is, or showing always a generic, and I don't want to have different behavior for each type. You can simply remove the specific exception types. You can only have exception, the generic one called, and you handle it the way you want. We only go with that if you want to behave differently for each of them. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. So yeah, again, it's important, and avoid as well something else. I saw it sometimes in people. In my opinion, it's not enough to write in the system.debug. I'm doing this here for the purpose of the session. But in my opinion, when you do just debug statement, or sometimes I saw people have the catch block empty, that means the error won't pop to the user, but I won't do anything. No one will know that something happened. The debug, someone will see it if you have the log active and you have the user who's performing the action added and you are checking it constantly. So what's right is usually you should have a logging mechanism by adding a message to an object for logging, by sending him an email, by doing something to notify someone or to keep the record available for someone without enabling the logs. Or if you're doing LWC, you would return this message and show it to the user. So they see the record failed, and then they can contact their admin. And if we are logging the error in an object, they can see the error and investigate further. So don't catch the error and do nothing with it, because that means neither the user will know that an exception happened or anyone can see the logs or do anything about it. So you have to be mindful what you will do with the exception. Okay. The next one is avoid hard coding IDs. And that's something a lot of people do. Like they can have here, for example, I saw it when we have an account that is, for example, the main company or the parent account for specific case. Sometimes they know, for example, in dev, it was this value, their ID. So they want to get the details for it. So they do hard coding like that. And then they go, let me get one here, select ID from account, limit 1, and I can do that. And they feel that they did everything they can do, or like they have list of contacts And I see here contacts equal select first name, last name, sorry, from contact, where account ID is like that. And to be honest, when they are developing, you'll find, okay, if I do the now system.debug, and I will print here list of contacts, I find that I will get values and everything is working fine. If I do that now, I will see it working. This one didn't have contacts, but like if I chose one, let me get one here that had four contacts. If I try this one, okay, let's try it. And I debug, I should get the four contacts here. And the problem with that is that when you move your logic, usually we develop in a developer sandbox or Scratch org, whatever, and then you move the code from the developer org to QA, then UET, then production. The record IDs will be different. So the same account with same name in one org may have a different ID in another one. So if you are hard coding your logic in one, um, like in your code, that means it will work only in the environment you are developing. Sometimes it will work if you just refresh the sandbox from production and it has the same ID, but you cannot guarantee always that the same records or same record type, like same IDs, you cannot hardcode an ID when working in so-called statement. That will be a very bad practice and it can break your code and it may break only in production if you're lucky, like if you are unlucky. And that at that time it will be very bad practice because you have to fix it and you may not know why it's breaking. You cannot find the account or the context. The good scenario for it, instead of hard coding the ID, figure out the different way to find it. Like, you know, that you have the account name is test account, but you don't know its ID in dev versus QA versus UAT. So instead of that, instead of getting with the ID, maybe get with the name and limit it to one. But again, that's sometimes, for example, it can cause an issue if you have duplicate names. So you have to be careful with your value. And also another thing that you can do is that instead of the name, if you know that you got, for example, you got in the UI, the account, you have an action on the account and you click on it and it does something. So you know that you have already, you are on the account record that you are interested in. So your condition can be here instead of the name, can be, for example, record ID. And you have the record ID, for example, you open an LWC from an action, so it has access to the record ID, and you pass it to the Apex in your query. So again, the most important thing, do not hard code IDs. IDs changes. IDs are risky, and that means if, for example, by mistake, I delete this account or I delete this product and reinsert it, it will have a different ID. Or if it has different IDs, different orgs, then it will work in one, but not the other. So always like either rely on a workflows that's, you know, it will fit your criteria that this is the name, it's the parent account, it's active, whatever are the conditions, you can put it in your query. Or if, for example, sometimes you are working with LWC and you are on the account and you hit, for example, the action, so you have access to the ID of the record, you can do your query with an ID in the workflows, but you're not hard coding the ID value. You're just getting it from the record and passing it to Apex, where it will be dynamic using the ID in the workflows, and that's it. And in that case, like if you're doing with the ID, you don't need to limit it, for example. So that's just something to keep in mind. Never hard code IDs. Any questions? Okay. We are good on the chat too. Okay. So the next one, we have the database methods, and that's something we discussed before. It's just a refresher for you. For example, I have here a list of accounts, and I have list accounts, and I will do new list of accounts. I will initialize it as an empty list, and then I will add here a new account, and I give it a name, test Sally 2, and then I have here another account. By mistake, I forgot to give it a name. And then I have a third one, test Sally 3 September. So if I don't have the same name, okay. So now I have a list of accounts, and I will go, sorry, and I will do an insert. So I did everything as expected. I have the list of accounts. I added the accounts in the list, so I'm not doing one by one. And then I try to insert. Do you remember, anyone, if I run this and try to query my records, how many records will be created? 1, 2, 3, none? Any guesses? I'm checking the chat. So we have a guess that 3 will be created. Any more guesses? Okay, 3. Okay, so the right answer is not 3. The right answer is 0. Okay, so, and the reason why, because I have one of them will give me the error that the name is required. We just tried it with the exception handling. When you are missing the name, it will tell you that there is a required field missing. Let's try it. I will create here. Let me do that. Data export. And I will write here, select ID from account, where name, like, and I'll give it here, like, I want to end with September here. So anything that ends with September. Now we don't have anything. Let me try it and see how it will work. First, we don't have the try and catch, so we got the error. It will tell me that here in line 5, we are missing a required field. So give me the error in the insert, and it will give me an exception that we have the field name missing and it's required. Now, someone may say, okay, it will create the first account and the third. Someone else will say, maybe it will create the first account, then it will fail, and the third will not be created. The right answer is still 0. So if I refresh here, nothing was created. And that's because I'm using the insert statement. And when you use the insert statement, that will be either all pass and will be inserted, or none will be inserted. So it's either all or none. Okay. What do you mean, Larry? What is null? Here the name is null, but because the name is a required field, so when we try to do the insertion of the second account, it failed because it's a required field. This may happen as well if you have, for example, validation, that the name should be, let's say, 10 characters, not more, not less. Or you have to have a combination of certain fields be filled. So it can fail due to required field flag, can be fail because the validation. So it depends on the situation. Here, the example we have, because of the name is missing. There is a suggestion that we create multi-line insert. So we create the first account alone, then we try to insert the second account alone, and then the third account alone. That would be against what we learned about bulkification. We want to bulkify our insert statement because we want to have all the insert statements all together. We don't want to create one by one. And now, yeah, we have 3 accounts, but maybe I'm inserting 100. I cannot create one by one. So what we should do is something we discussed before. We'll use the database.insert method instead. So here, the method is database.insert, and it takes the list of accounts that we want to insert. Here, let me open it for you. Database class Apex. We saw it before together, but let's check it again. And if I go to the insert, let me, if I get it here faster. I'm looking for the insert. Okay. So here, when you have the insert, you have the all or none. Okay. So when you do the all or none, this one, you have all or none flag. This is a Boolean. When you have it as true, it will behave the same as the insert statement we just tried together. And that means if I run it and one of them fails, all of them will be rolled back. But if I set this to false, that means it's not all or none. That means insert for me what is succeeded and it can be inserted, and just ignore the ones that will fail. And that return an array or a list of saved results. We can loop through them, and we tried this last time. Let's try it again. What we'll do is that the results will return a result, save result for each of the accounts we are trying to insert. We check one by one, is it successful? Yes or no. If it's successful, I ignore. I don't need to log anything. If it's not successful, that means it failed. I can debug or log what was the error message. So that means when I have all or none set to false, that means I would be able to insert the ones that will pass and ignores the ones that will fail. So in that case, how many records do you think will be created? 1, 2, 3, 0. I'm checking the chat. 2. Yes, exactly. So that's what we will be expecting. Let's run it, and I will expect one debug statement to tell me that one account failed. So let's run it now. If I go down, sorry, I didn't comment the insert, so it was failing. If I comment the insert and use the database insert instead with the all or none, that will happen. Can we log the error message in a list instead? Can we log the error message in a list instead? What do you mean? Here, the results are a list, and for each account, there is a corresponding result. It tells me this account passed or not. Like the first account, the first result for it, it will be success. Then the second result will be failure that correspond to the second account because it's missing the first name, the name. That the third result will give me success because the account passed and it got inserted. So the save result is a list. I'm looping through it one by one to find the failures. You can you may want to say which accounts succeeded or to do further actions on the successful. So you can have an else where it's successful and you do something else. But here with the failure, I can figure out what's the message, and I can even see what are the fields that cause the error message. Like there is more to the save result class method and properties that we can use. So let's try it now. If I run this and do the debug statement, it's running. And now I see one debug statement telling me that the required fields are missing. And if I run the query again, I see now that I have 2 accounts. The first one got created, and the third one. the second one failed, and it didn't cause the 3 accounts to fail. It just failed for the account that failed to be inserted, but the other got great. Okay, so any other questions? Okay, so that's what you have to think about when you are working with bulkified accounts or bulkified insert updates. What's the behavior? Sometimes on purpose, the client wants to fail everything if one fails. And sometimes the client requirements wants to insert whatever you want and skip the ones that fail. Don't fail everything together. So if you want to pass only the ones that succeeded, and don't roll back everything, use the database insert with the all or none flag set to false. So those are the main best practices that we wanted to cover with the SObject that you want to keep in mind. No query inside the for loop. Try to bulkify your DML operations. This is not just for SObject. Always have a try and catch. Make sure that you are catching the right exception type, and I prefer to have the generic at the end, even if I have specific exception types. Do not ever hardcode IDs, and I keep this in mind as well, not just IDs. Anytime you are hardcoding something, think twice. Do I really want to hardcode it? Is it the right way to do it or not? Fifth is using the database.insert. If you want to have control over if you want to fail everything, or you pass the ones that will succeed and just fail the ones that will not be inserted or updated successfully. Any questions? Checking the chat. Okay, I think we are good. We won't have time to cover the exercise, but I would keep the picture for you in case you didn't do them. You may go and work on them offline, and you can send me the gist file, the link for your gist to review the solutions if you want. And if you have specific questions as well about any of them, you can reach out to me on either LinkedIn or Code with Sally Slack or the military Slack, whichever you are on or comfortable to use. Slack, LinkedIn, you pick whichever you prefer, and I will do my best to get back to you as soon as possible. This will be the last one. So you have 6 of them. I encourage you to work on them, try it, and let me know if you have any questions, or if you want me to review your answers, send it to me and I will work on that as soon as I can. The exercise you can use there is a question where to share. Okay, let me log in to my GitHub. So you need to have GitHub. Let me enter the code so I can access 347. Okay. So later. Okay. So this, for example, someone sent me their just as a way of like within GitHub. If you have GitHub, you can go to your gists, and then you can add new gist here. You can give it a description. For example, it's SObject. You can create multiple files. So you can have here one for exercise 1, second one for exercise 2, and you can paste your solution after working on it on developer console. And after that, like in here, this is SObjects homework. You save it, create a secret gist, so no one other than people who has the link can see it. You will just go and give me this link and you pass it to me. So I can go and check what you did for exercise 1 versus number 2, and I can leave you comments here. The benefit of that as well, if, for example, I ask you to review exercise 1, or there's something wrong in exercise 1, you may do the changes and let me know so I can check it again. It's easier for me to see when you do the changes in your gist. I can go for the revision and I can see what exactly you changed, so I can see if you applied the comments correctly or not. So that's what you would go to, like just you need to have a GitHub account, go from the image here and go to your gist, create a new one, give it a name for the topic, add as many files as the exercises we have, and then share for me this link. Don't give me your gist URL because it will have anything, like you may be using just for something else. It would be confusing for me to go through all of them because I don't know which one you want me to review. So just go to the one that you want me to review and give me just the link for it, and I will go and review it for you. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. So again, I'm happy to have you today. I was happy to be with you and explain the like some of the best practices for Apex, specifically for the SObjects. I'll see you next week. If you have any questions or if you want me to review your homework, message me on Slack or on LinkedIn, and I'll do my best to get back to you as soon as I can. And next time, it's either we'll talk a bit about Dreamforce or we'll be talking about SOCO and SOSO statements and what's the difference and when to use them and what's the syntax, because it's very important skill to learn, especially for SOCO. You would use it a lot. So it's very important to know the syntax and how to write it and how you can filter or how you can limit your results or pagination for them. It's very important to go through these concepts together. So I will try to prepare some data, and hopefully I prepare some data that you can import it to your org, and you can follow with the same like statements we'll be working with in the session. You can take it offline and play with it in your org as well.